wind rolled in from the sea, carrying the sharp scent of salt and decay. Waves crashed against jagged rocks below, their rhythmic pounding against the shore the only sound cutting through the stillness of the night. The lighthouse stood tall, a dark silhouette against the overcast sky, its glass windows staring blankly at the blackened waters. It had been abandoned for decades, its lantern never relit, yet something about it still called to those who wandered too close. A lone figure approached the base of the tower, pulling their coat tighter against the cold they had come seeking, answers drawn by the mystery of the disappearances, the whispered stories passed down through generations. Some claimed the lighthouse was cursed, that those who stepped inside never returned. Others dismissed it as nothing more than a crumbling relic of the past, swallowed by time and superstition. But the truth remained elusive, buried beneath years of silence. The iron door groaned on its rusted hinges as it was pushed open, revealing a darkened interior thick with the scent of damp wood and salt. Footsteps echoed as the figure stepped. Inside, the weight of the air pressing down on them like an unseen force. Dust swirled in the weak glow of a flashlight, revealing peeling wallpaper and old furniture left to rot. The lighthouse should have been empty, just another forgotten structure claimed by the elements. But something felt wrong. A distant creak echoed from above, soft but deliberate. Like the weight of footsteps on the spiraling staircase, the figure hesitated, breath hitching as they scanned the shadows. The wind outside had died, leaving only the sound of their own heartbeat drumming in their ears. Something was waiting. The air inside the lighthouse carried a weight that had nothing to do with the thick scent of salt and mildew. Dust clung to the walls, coating every surface in a fine layer of neglect. The floorboards groaned under careful steps, their creak swallowed by the vast silence pressing in from all sides. The walls, once painted a crisp white, were now cracked and peeling, revealing the aged wood beneath. A damp chill clung to the space, curling around the visitor's skin despite the heavy coat wrapped tightly around their shoulders. It wasn't just the cold, it was the feeling of being watched, the undeniable awareness of something unseen lingering in the darkness. The flashlight's beam flickered over the room, revealing furniture draped in dust-covered sheets. A wooden chair, long abandoned, was toppled on its side. A small table, its legs uneven from years of disrepair, held an old oil lamp covered in grime. Remnants of someone's life left behind as if they had stepped away for a moment and never returned. A gust of wind pushed against the building, rattling the glass panes set high in the walls. Somewhere above, a slow, dragging creak echoed down the stairwell. The sound was subtle, almost imperceptible, but it was there just enough to make the skin tighten across the back of the visitor's neck. They turned toward the spiral staircase, its steps disappearing into the shadows above. The metal railing, once polished and strong, was now rusted, its surface pitted and rough beneath hesitant fingertips. Another sound, softer this time, whispered through the still air. Faint rustling like the shift of fabric or the movement of paper disturbed by an unseen breeze. The visitor swung the flashlight toward the far corner of the room, illuminating a stack of faded newspapers and scattered documents on the floor. The pages stirred ever so slightly, though the air remained eerily still. Frowning, they knelt, picking up the topmost sheet. The ink had faded, but the words remained legible. The date read over a century old, yet the edges of the paper were only slightly yellowed. Hard to preserve for something that should have long since crumbled. Floorboard groaned from above. The visitor stilled, listening. The silence stretched, thick and unyielding. Their grip on the paper tightened, heart pounding against their ribs. It could have been the building settling, wood expanding in the damp air, but it sounded deliberate, like the careful shift of weight. Exhaling slowly, they set the newspaper down. Rising to their feet, the flashlight's beam moved cautiously over the room once more, pausing on the spiral staircase. Something about it felt different now, as though it wasn't just leading upward. It was inviting them to follow. The lighthouse had stood empty for years. No one had been here in decades, and yet, as the silence stretched impossibly thin, it became painfully clear they were not alone. Dust floated in the air, catching the dim glow of the flashlight as the visitor cautiously stepped toward the far corner of the room. The scattered papers rustled at their feet, brittle and fragile, their edges curled with time. A faded newspaper headline caught their eye, its ink smudged but still readable. Lighthouse keeper vanishes, no trace found. The date was nearly a century old. A slow breath escaped their lips, misting slightly in the cold air. They turned their gaze toward a wooden desk pushed against the wall, its surface warped from years of exposure to the damp. A drawer hung slightly ajar, as though someone had rummaged through it in a hurry but never finished. They hesitated, then reached out, fingers curling around the rusted metal handle. It stuck for a moment, resisting, before groaning open with a reluctant creak inside. The dim light revealed a small leather-bound journal, the cover once deep brown, had darkened with moisture, the spine cracked and delicate. The visitor lifted it carefully, brushing away the fine dust clinging to its surface. Pages inside were warped, edges frayed, yet the ink remained eerily intact. Flipping to the first entry, they found neat, deliberate handwriting, March 3rd, 1921. The light went out again last night. No storm, no wind, just darkness. It never should have gone out, not on its own. I heard something at the door, but when I checked, there was nothing, only the sea whispering below. A chill curled down their spine as they turned the page. Entries followed each, describing strange occurrences, missing tools, whispers in the night, shadows moving when no one else should have been there. March 8th, 1921. I found footprints leading up the stairs, but they weren't mine. No one else is here. Their pulse quickened, a deep unease settling into their bones. The writing became more erratic as the entries progressed. The words hurried, scratched onto the pages with growing desperation. March 15th, 1921. The door was bolted. I know it was, but this morning it was open. Something is here with me. It doesn't want me to leave. The final entry sent ice through their veins. March 19th, 1921. I heard it breathing outside my door last night. I didn't open it. I won't. But I think it's already inside. The handwriting stopped abruptly. The page left unfinished. The journal slipped slightly in their grasp, their fingers trembling. The room felt colder now, the air pressing in closer. They swallowed hard, forcing themselves to glance around the space. The silence had changed. It was no longer empty, it was expected. A gust of wind rattled the window panes, but there was no wind outside. A floorboard creaked from the stairwell. Their breath hitched. The journal wasn't the only thing left behind. The journal felt heavier in their hands now, as if the words it held carried more than just ink. A distant wave crashed against the jagged rocks outside, the sound muffled by the thick stone walls of the lighthouse. The air inside remained unnervingly still. They forced a slow breath, exhaling softly as they turned toward the narrow staircase leading up to the lantern room. A faint shuffle echoed from above. Their pulse stuttered. It could have been the wind pushing against the old structure, or maybe a bird nesting in the rafters. Rational thoughts fought for control, yet something inside whispered otherwise. The lighthouse had been abandoned for decades. No one was supposed to be here. The wooden steps groaned underfoot as they ascended. The dim beam of the flashlight trembled against the curved walls, casting elongated shadows that flickered with each movement. The stairwell twisted upward, the next landing just out of sight. Another step creaked, not from beneath them, dot above dot. Their breath came shallow now. The wind outside picked up, rattling the window panes below. It howled through unseen cracks, threading through the lighthouse like a low, distant voice. They reached the next level, pausing at the threshold of a small, cluttered room. Dust-coated shelves lined the walls, filled with rusted tools and tattered ledgers. A small cot rested in the corner, its mattress sunken and covered in a thin film of decay. The space felt recently used. A lantern sat on the desk, its glass smeared with age, yet the wick looked new. A half-empty cup of water stood beside it. The liquid inside was fresh. They swallowed hard. The journal in their grip seemed to vibrate, or perhaps it was just their unsteady hands. Their gaze landed on an old mirror hanging beside the door. The reflection revealed the room behind them, the desk, the cot, the open shelves. But something was wrong. Their own silhouette stood in the foreground, but there was another shadow just behind them. A breath that was not their own stirred the air near their ear. The flashlight flickered. A sound of single, deliberate knock echoed from the lantern room above. Their body tensed, muscles coiling with instinct. The air thickened, pressing against them like unseen hands guiding them forward. Every part of them screamed to leave, but something compelled them to keep going. A second knock. Then a voice, not quite a whisper, not quite a breath. a fragmented sound that curled into their ears like something long forgotten, barely a word, but enough to freeze the blood in their veins. Come back. The lantern flared to life on the desk. They ran. The steps blurred beneath them as they descended in a frantic rush, their breath coming in short, uneven bursts. The flashlight trembled in their grip, casting erratic beams against the walls, distorting shadows into grotesque shapes. The journal remained clutched tightly in their other hand, its pages fluttering as if whispering some unseen warning. The knocking had stopped. Silence swallowed the lighthouse once more, but it was the wrong kind of silence, the kind that felt deliberate, calculated. A silence that listened. Their foot landed on the last step before the main floor when a sharp, scraping sound cut through the air. Their body went rigid. The wooden chair near the desk shifted. Not by much, just an inch, but enough. Enough to see. Their stomach twisted as they stepped back against the cold wall, knuckles whitening around the flashlight. The chair dragged another inch, a slow, deliberate movement, then another. They willed their breath to slow, but the pulse in their ears was deafening. The lighthouse had been abandoned for decades. No one was here. No one but them. The chair stopped, settling into eerie stillness. A heartbeat passed. Then something sighed. The sound was faint, almost indistinguishable from the shifting wind outside. But it was close, too close. The air turned heavy, pressing against their chest. The damp, stale scent of the lighthouse deepened into something else, something older, something wrong. And then they heard it. A whisper, not from behind, not from above, from inside the journal. Pages turned of their own accord, flipping rapidly as though unseen fingers were searching for something desperate and rushed. The flashlight beam quivered against the yellowed paper. A single phrase scrawled in hurried, jagged ink appeared before their eyes, fresh as if just written. Do not let IT reach the light. A crash erupted from above. Their body jolted, instinct forcing them backward as a loud, splintering sound filled the air. Something was moving in the lantern room. The floorboards groaned as footsteps, heavy, deliberate, and impossibly slow, descended from the unseen level above. The hair on their arms lifted. Their breath came in shallow gasps as they pressed against the doorway. Footsteps dashed closer. The stairwell yawned open like a dark mouth, revealing nothing. The beam of the flashlight flickered as it landed on the base of the steps. The footsteps stopped. The air thickened. The journal in their hands shuddered as if gripped by unseen hands. Then the whisper returned, soft, almost tender. It spoke their name. Their grip on reality teetered, every fiber of their being screaming for escape. But before they could take another step, the lantern in the corner flared to life. A shadow stood at the top of the stairs. It wasn't moving. It didn't have to. It was waiting. The light from the lantern flickered erratically, casting long, jagged shadows that stretched and recoiled along the lighthouse walls. The figure at the top of the stairs remained still, its presence weighing heavy in the air. A chill spread through the room, creeping into their bones like a whisper of something long forgotten. The journal trembled in their hands, its pages still shifting as if alive, as if urging them forward or warning them to stop. Final page fluttered open, revealing words scrawled in uneven, desperate ink. The light was never meant to guide, it was meant to trap. Their stomach tightened as the pieces of the puzzle began fitting together. The weight of the revelation, settling like lead. The lighthouse was never built to save lives. It was built to contain something. Something old, something hungry. A deep breath shuddered from their lips as they forced themselves to look up at the figure. It didn't move, didn't breathe. It watched, and in its stillness, they felt a strange familiarity, a recognition that sent their pulse into a frantic rhythm. The missing keepers, the vanished visitors, the disappearances stretching back for more than a century. They weren't random. The lighthouse hadn't claimed them. It had absorbed them. A surge of cold, crushing dread gripped them. The truth was clear now. No one had ever left this place. They weren't the first to come searching for answers. They wouldn't be the last. The lantern flared again, bright enough to momentarily blind them. A voice, not a whisper, not human, spoke from all around, from nowhere and everywhere at once. You cannot leave. You belong to the light now. A suffocating pressure filled the air. The walls felt closer, as if the lighthouse itself had drawn breath. The stairs creaked as the figure at the top took its first step down. Their bodies screamed for escape, but their feet refused to move. The lighthouse had been waiting, and now it had chosen. The walls pulsed, the air thick with something unseen yet suffocating. The figure at the top of the stairs descended slowly, its footsteps echoing unnaturally, stretching longer than they should, as if the space itself warped around its presence. The light flickered again, not from the lantern, but from something. Within the wall, something alive. Realization settled like ice in their veins. This place wasn't haunted. It was feeding. They willed their body to move, but the lighthouse held them in place, the pull of its secrets wrapping around them, like invisible chains. The air buzzed with whispers, voices overlapping, some frantic, others resigned. They weren't alone. They had never been alone. A sudden gust extinguished the lantern, plunging them into darkness. Panic clawed at their throat, breath shallow, heart hammering. The steps continued, closer now, a flicker of moonlight. Through the window revealed the figure, not quite human anymore. Its face was familiar yet wrong, blurred like an old photograph, shifting between the missing keepers, the vanished wanderers, the lost souls, the light whose sharp breath, the light, returned, but they were outside standing on the cliff. The lighthouse now a dark silhouette against the sky. Tide crashed below, the world untouched by the horrors within, yet something was different. The air pressed heavier, the wind whispering their name. The lighthouse still stood, waiting, watching. They turned, their own reflection staring back in the glass of the boarded-up entrance, but the eyes looking at them were not their own. The lighthouse had chosen, it had taken, and somewhere within the shifting corridors, a new whisper joined the chorus.